Good morning, and welcome to the fourth and final virtual session of the Heads Together Think Tank. My name is Shauna Fenwick, and I am your host today. I'd like to welcome back everyone who's returning, who's been here on some of our previous sessions, and a very warm welcome if this is your first time with us. While we're meeting today on a virtual platform, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous people and traditional territories on which all of us work, live, and play. Here in Victoria, we work and live on the traditional unceded territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples and ancestral lands where you are joining us from today. Before we begin, I have a few general comments. I hope you were able to sign on to the webinar with no difficulty. If you need technical help at any point during the webinar today, there's an email that you can use to contact help, and that email will be in the chat box. We have a dedicated team working behind the scenes today, and you'll get to meet some of them at the end of the program. All virtual sessions are being recorded, and once they are through their final post-production editing, they'll be available on the Heads Together Think Tank. Once they are up there, you can watch the video recordings at any time. And we really encourage you to send the link to the recording and to the website to people who might not be able to be here today. This morning, we'll take an early break at about 10:05, so just after 10 o'clock. And our break will be 15 minutes. We'll reconvene at 10:20. So our second half is a little bit longer today than they have been in previous sessions. One last thing before we dive into today's session, and we have a poll for you. Today we have two polls, and those of you who've been here before know that all polls are anonymous, that your answer will not be connected with your name in any way. So for today's poll, Nikki, would you please launch the poll? You should see a box appear on your screen. And today's question, to have a little bit of fun, if something was named after you, what would you choose? If something was named after you, what would you choose? Would it be a type of food, an insect, or an animal? Would it be a plant, a mountain, a river, a type of shoes, a new star, or a planet? And so let's have a little bit of fun, and you can choose one answer. If there's more than one of you watching at a site, please just choose one person to answer. And we'll watch that poll to see the answers come in. Once we've had a number come in, we'll ask Nikki to close it. That's great. We see the answers coming in. That's lovely. Nobody yet wants to have a new star or planet named after them. That's wonderful. So we'll wait for just another moment or two to see what comes on. Those of you who've been watching Bonnie Henry may know that she had a pair of shoes named after her. Oh, we do have a new star or planet choice showing up. Great. So Nikki, I leave it to you as to when to close the poll and to post the results. That's great. So wouldn't it be fun in BC? That's such a BC answer, isn't it? To have a river named after you. Great. Thank you very much for joining in. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you someone who needs no introduction to most of you, Janelle Brice-Biagione. Janelle is the project leader for the Heads Together Think Tank project. She's been the prime motivator, the inspiration, and the coordinator for all of us working on the project. Janelle remarried 28 years ago. She and her husband Lyle, along with her daughters Mariah and Dale, created the CGB Center for Traumatic Life Losses to commemorate the 25th year of her husband's passing. The center's mission is to provide individualized and relevant solutions to everyday people. Janelle is a proud grandmother to Sam, 14, Grayson, 13, and Atticus, 7. Atticus was born with Dandy Walker syndrome, is nonverbal, and uses a walker and a wheelchair to get around. Janelle is excited to be working on her next book, Atticus and Friends, which shares the experiences of Atticus at home, at school, and in the community. This book will be available through the center, with proceeds being used to develop Lego counseling services for children experiencing loss. And how cool is that? Fun fact, Janelle's favorite time of year is Christmas, and she's been known to have up to 4 decorated trees in her house. Her husband Lyle and Janelle have Santa and Mrs. Claus outfits and have been known to show up at fundraisers and to go to children's houses on Christmas Eve. So now, please welcome Janelle to set the stage for our final virtual session.
Thank you, Shauna. Good morning and welcome to our final session of Heads Together Think Tank. And although this is where we end the virtual events, it's actually where our work is going to begin. I do want to say thank you to the Vancouver Foundation and the Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction for funding the virtual events and our website, the entire project. We couldn't have done this without your support. And I'm also pleased to announce the winner of our $25 gift card from last week's survey is going to our dear friend Judy Bryan. And that was amazing to see her name. This is a random draw that is done by our evaluator who lives in Gibsons, and she emailed me to say Judy's won the card. So I'll be sure to get that to you, Judy. I want to thank everyone who took time to answer the survey because it will help us determine our next steps as we move forward. There will be one more survey at the conclusion of today, and that will close on Monday next week. So there's still time to win, and there's still time to get your voice heard. So please take 5 minutes to complete the survey at the end of today's session. I want to thank our speakers from last week who provided us a rich conversation on research. We received many great comments from people who were listening. What stood out for everyone in the surveys was the need for more education, supportive housing, integrated care, and collaboration. And that's exactly what we wanted to hear because we do think that collaboration is key. The presentations on intimate partner violence and self-identity after brain injury brought many positive comments as well. Today, as we wrap up with looking at how we can reinforce our communities, I want to ask you, as you listen, to reflect on what is needed where you live, not only in services and supports, but we want to know how business owners, banks, local merchants, anywhere, anyone comes in contact with a survivor of brain injury, how they could be supported to thrive in their business and connect with this person because we want our people to thrive in the communities as well. So let us know how your community could be supported to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. I've been working with Janelle for maybe 5 months now, and she's truly an inspirational leader. She's energetic, she's well connected in the brain injury community, and she's motivated because she really cares about people with brain injury. And so if you're working in this sector or if you've had someone in your life who's had a brain injury, this is really a movement to get behind. This is our last virtual session, but as Janelle said, there's very much more work ahead of us. As we mention each week, we'd like these sessions to be conversations. And although it's a virtual format, the conversations are still important to us. We still want your input. There's 2 ways for you to give us input today. One is the chat box, and the second is via the survey that we'll send out at the end of the session. Remember that there are discussion groups on the Heads Together Think Tank, one for each of the virtual sessions, so they are topic specific, and other discussion groups for survivors, for family members, and for service providers. If you're using a laptop or a desktop computer, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see icons. The chat box will open if you click on the chat icon. We'll use the chat function to hear ideas for improving services for people with brain injury, mental health, and addiction. The chat space is for positive and constructive comments that will help us build our final report. This is not the space for airing grievances. At the bottom of the chat box, you'll see 2 settings, all panelists and all panelists and attendees. If you've been on Zoom before, you know that the chat box can be really distracting if there are a lot of comments. So when a speaker is making their presentation, you will only see the all panelist settings. Individual speakers will not be monitoring the chat box, but we do have team members here who will, so if there's anything that needs to be addressed, they will do so. When we ask for your comments after a speaker, we'll open up the second setting for all panelists and attendees. And if you'd like your comments to be seen by everyone, make sure you choose that second setting. As a test of chat, please open the chat box now and type in how you found out about the Heads Together Think Tank. How did you find out about the Heads Together think tank and the virtual sessions? That's great. That's great. So now for our program. The purpose of today's session is to share and explore different ideas for supporting people with brain injury, mental health, and addiction in their home communities. It's my pleasure now to welcome our first speaker, Dr. John HIGENBOTTAM, and his presentation, Services for People with Complex Needs, Past and Present. Dr. HIGENBOTTAM is a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist who has held senior clinical leadership positions in BC, including Vice President, Vancouver Hospital and Health Sciences Centre, Vice President, BC Rehab, and Vice President, Riverview Hospital. His major clinical research interests are in developing, implementing, and evaluating effective recovery-oriented services for people with complex needs. And that's certainly the population we're focusing on today. John has held several academic positions at the University of Victoria, Douglas College, and UBC. He's also editor-in-chief of the Canadian Journal of Community Mental Health, an important venue for Canadian mental health research. John HIGENBOTTAM is highly respected in research and practice. He has served on a variety of provincial and national mental health organizations, including 2 terms as chair of the Canadian Alliance for Mental Illness and Mental Health, Canada's major alliance of 19 national mental health organizations. As a director of BC's Community Action Initiative, as chair of Psychosocial Rehabilitation, Réadaptation Psychosociale Canada, and chair of its BC chapter. This is Canada's major organization promoting psychosocial rehabilitation practices as essential to recovery and mental health system reform. He also was a member of the Mental Health Commission of Canada's Service Systems Advisory Committee, and while on this committee, he co-led a major national study and report on mental health housing called Turning the Key. Dr. John HIGENBOTTAM is well suited to be our opening speaker today around services for people with complex needs, brain injury, mental health, and addiction. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John HIGENBOTTAM.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to share my screen. So you've already heard most of my history, and I'm not going to go over it, but this slide really shows that I've got a number of perspectives on people with complex needs based on my experiences working in rehab with brain injury, working in tertiary services, tertiary psychiatric services. I did a stint, I guess is the best term for it, as vice president of Riverview for 12 years. And my focus there really was on developing services for people with complex needs. And then later on, I was involved with BC Rehab, Jeff Strong and Pearson, working more directly with people with brain injury. And then later on, graduated to VGH. And while I was there, the one thing I would just mention is I had a strong interest in providing services for people who had so-called neuropsychiatric problems. Neuropsychiatric problems are of course, behavioral issues and psychiatric issues associated with brain injury. And again, people with very complex needs. And I was fortunate to get support to develop what became the provincial neuropsychiatry program. So I just wanted to throw that in. What I've been working on lately in terms of clinical work has been actually some consulting with the city of Kelowna. And the focus here has been on people with complex needs in the Kelowna area. And these, I'll say a bit more about these, but they're very characteristic of people with complex needs who are very much at the intersection of brain injury, mental health, and addictions. They have the whole spectrum of issues, and they have them. They have all of this in their history, and so I'll be really trying to focus on my main message here is that we need to forget about diagnoses and clinical diagnostics and putting people in little diagnostic boxes, because that's been a real major problem in terms of arranging people services for people with complex needs. So I'll get more into that in shortly. So what are we talking about when we talk about people with complex needs? We're talking about, as I just said, people who are at this intersection of brain injury, mental illness, substance use, and many of these people are homeless. And often, particularly in British Columbia, they are often referred to, thanks to the Ministry of Health in large part, as SAMIs. It's a term I don't like at all, but it's out there. And there actually have been official publications on SAMIs, but what we're talking about here are people who are at this intersection. They're severely addicted. They've got mental illness, which may be, if you want to use diagnostic criteria, it may be mild or severe mental illness. And they have, most of them have a history of brain injury. Almost all of them also have a history of trauma, personal trauma, as well as physical trauma in their lives. And I'll just make a reference here to an excellent study that was done on these people entitled, as you can see, their housing and support for adults with severe addictions and/or mental illness in British Columbia. It was published by CARMA, wonderful acronym, which stands for the Center for Addiction Research and Mental Health. And this is basically a research group who has been operating out of Simon Fraser University for some time. And this leader was Dr. Elliot Goldner, who's a well-known, excellent psychiatrist who was very interested in service issues and particularly focus on people with complex needs. And unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago. It was a major loss. But this is an excellent study, and if people who have an interest in this area should read this study. And the lead investigators are people like Julian Summers, who's continued this work. He's forming a research group at Simon Fraser now, and he's been getting a lot of press coverage, and as well as having published a number of very important articles on the needs for these people. Okay, I just want to look a little bit at the history of services for people with complex needs. And in the past, I think, as many of you, certainly from BC, would know, and then people from other provinces like Alberta, you've had similar services there as well. The only service which was available for people with complex needs in the past in BC was Riverview. And Riverview was a very, very large provincial psychiatric hospital. It had a forensic unit, which was actually located across the road, which is still there. Actually, it's the Forensic Psychiatric Hospital, but at one time it was part of Riverview. Riverview was really the backstop for the whole, in fact, it was virtually the whole psychiatric system, as well as services for people with complex needs. And some very, very specialized services were offered at Riverview. Just as for an example, patients who had brain disorders like Huntington's disease and so on received services, very, very good services at Riverview. I worked there for 12 years, and I can tell you that it was one of the most caring communities I've ever worked at. The staff were very specialized. They provided excellent care. And when Riverview was, I'll say a bit more about this, but when Riverview was closed back in 2013, it really left a big hole in the service system, because Riverview would work with people with complex needs who nobody else would work with, quite frankly. One of the chronic problems in BC, and the problem is still out there, that mental health and substance use services have never been really effectively integrated, certainly at the field level And despite the fact, if you look at the ministry website, it'll say this Ministry of Mental Health and Substance Use. The reality is that this integration has not taken place in the community, and there's a long history of this lack of integration, and it's still out there, unfortunately, is a major problem. I'll say more about that shortly. Brain injury services, and the focus 60s, 70s, and 80s were programs like GF Strong and Holy Family Hospital. And then later on, there was the Provincial Brain Injury Program and certainly for private community programs. So what happened in the 90s and in 2000 to the present, basically, is, as I mentioned, Riverview was closed in 2013. That caused really a loss of specialized tertiary treatment services. Tertiary treatment, what that really means is a level of service which is not available in the general hospitals, in the acute care hospitals in the provinces. So, for example, as I mentioned, I was vice president at Vancouver Hospital. I was responsible for psychiatry there, and we always had a group of patients at Vancouver Hospital who really required a much more specialized treatment. They needed to go where they might be in treatment and receive rehab and go on specialized medication regimes, and where you really needed a specialized capability for several months or so. This wasn't a forever program, but it was a time-limited program, but there was a real need to do that. And one of the programs at Riverview provided that what I would call medium-term specialized tertiary treatment for people who exceeded the capabilities of the general hospitals. And we always had wait lists from St. Paul's in Vancouver, from VGH and from other parts of the province as well, requiring that. And so when that closed in 2013, it really threw the whole province into crisis. And as well known, we've had the ongoing crisis ever since with people in places like the downtown east side and other, usually in major population centers where people with complex needs tend to gravitate. 2007, the ministry tried to respond to this. They had the so-called SAMI initiative, and there were promises of all sorts of money going out to recreate that specialized tertiary treatment capability in the regions of the province. There's a lot of suspicion with people like myself that the money really never made it out there. And certainly, we've never really seen that specialized treatment capability recreated throughout the province. And it's very difficult to do that because what we're talking about is a very specialized group of practitioners, and interdisciplinary practitioners, nurses, doctors, psychiatrists, brain injury specialists, vocational specialists, and that sort of group. It's very difficult to create that in different sites. And so it really hasn't happened in most parts of the province. And so there are references to tertiary services out there, but a lot of the tertiary services really are for people who really don't have that much of a need for active clinical intervention. They're people who've often had these serious complex problems for many years, and the focus now is really on providing long-term residential care for them, quite frankly. So we've lost that the specialized tertiary capability. 2008, surprisingly, I shouldn't make a political statement, but the previous government actually suddenly out of the blue decided they needed some treatment for people with concurrent disorders. Concurrent disorders are really what we're talking about to a large extent here. Concurrent disorders are people with a serious mental illness and addiction and addictions. But most of those people, again, have histories of brain injury as well. So they set up 100 beds in Burnaby, And those 100 beds are now being relocated to the Riverview campus, which was a bit of a breakthrough in my opinion, because politically they decided that nothing was ever going to happen on the Riverview grounds again, and yet there was this serious need for these specialized services. So there's 100 beds now, which is not nearly enough. And of course, you can't just have treatment beds. You also need all of the housing resources and everything else. I mean, what happens to people when they complete their treatment and rehab? You need some place for them to go, basically. And we're talking about housing first programs and so on in the communities. So it's a good start, but it's only part of the solution, basically. And there's much more of this required. So there's been a steady increase in people with complex needs. We just have to look in the paper or watch TV every day to know about this. And many of these people are in fact homeless. Another factor has been the reports that have been produced by the Vancouver Police Department. If you haven't read these, you should. They are wonderful reports, and actually the leadership in Vancouver and the Metro Vancouver area to get some effective services in Vancouver has actually come from the police. It's been quite an ironic situation. They have had the most humane, sensible approach to all this because they've read the literature and they know that you need things like assertive community treatment programs and so on, really, to support people with complex needs. You need housing for them, et cetera, et cetera. So those reports have really kind of pressured the clinical establishment and the health authorities and to a certain extent the ministry to do something. The Union of BC Municipalities 2 or 3 years ago, they were really turning on the heat to reopen Riverview, basically, and you probably will remember some of this. So what needs to be done? We need to restore that specialized treatment and rehab capability, which is capable, accessible. People have to get access to this. It has to be low barrier for people and for clinicians to have people receive the services they require. It has to be accountable. This is a huge problem in the mental health addictions world, particularly not so much in the brain injury, but we're talking about people who've got all of these. We need that accountability out there so that people don't fall into the cracks, that they receive the services they require. And we need, there's a huge problem that we are not using effective evidence-based practices. Why do we have this revolving door of people in and out of the psych units? Why do we have this revolving door of homeless people who get picked up by the police, hauled into the emergency departments and then discharged? They have it all happen again. Why do we have the repeat overdoses, et cetera? Because one of the big problems is we just aren't doing things which are effective. And so there's a real need to get, and yet what's frustrating is there's a very, very strong, abundant literature on what really works, for example. And just as an example, second point here, ACT, which are sort of community treatment teams, where you're providing very, very intense follow-up for people in the community on a 1 to 10 ratio of staff to clients. Those teams will, even in third world countries, they reduce the emergency rehospitalization rate by 50%. And where they've done this in BC, unfortunately not enough, they've managed to cut their rehospitalization rate by 50%. It's a no-brainer, if I can use that term. But trying to get the acute care system and the government to get their head around this has been extremely difficult. And because with the current funding model within the health authorities, the money all goes into the acute care side and it doesn't go into the community side, which is where you need the intervention. You need the community supports to keep people out of hospitals and keep people so people can live successfully in the community and not have the police hauling them into the hospital all the time because of their behavior. Another big problem, which might not seem like a big problem, but it is a huge one, is we don't have good information systems in healthcare or in human services, but particularly in healthcare. The information systems are so primitive. I mean, we're still using fax machines and stuff like that. and there's no continuity and accountability of service providers. Somebody gets discharged from hospital and nobody in the community knows about it, and suddenly they're back in the emergency room again because nobody knew or cared or provided the kind of follow-up. So we've got people who are falling into the cracks of a patchwork, dysfunctional service system, quite frankly. So that's all I've got to say. The real need is, as I mentioned, is we need to get away from diagnostic groups. This is what I tell my student. You know, it's irrelevant whether somebody's primary diagnosis is addictions, or whether they're being diagnosed with schizophrenia, or whether they're have got ABI. That's completely irrelevant. We need to focus on people's needs. What are their needs? They've got complex needs, and the solutions are that we really have to provide the whole range of services these people require. They need housing, they need clinical support, integrated clinical services. They need a job. In most cases, in many cases, it's the old story. They needed a job, a friend, and a place to live. And that's what we have to be able to provide. So that's all I'm going to say.
There's so much more that you could have told us today about the history and the implications of some of the changes over the past decades. Unfortunately, we don't have time for a question and answer with any of our speakers today, but I'd really encourage you to use the discussion groups on the Heads Together think tank to post any questions that you might have, and we'll be monitoring that. In the meantime, we'd like you to use the chat to think about Dr. Higginbottam's presentation and what lesson can we learn from the history and from his recommendations to improve services for brain injury, mental health, and addiction, people with those concurrent disorders. I love what you say, Dr. Higginbottam, about forgetting about a diagnosis, because we are people in communities, and how can we best support people with needs in our community? Thank you very much. So in the chat, what lesson can we learn from history, from Dr. Higginbottam's presentation, that we can take into the future as we look ahead and plan? Thank you, Dr. Higginbottam. I'm now pleased to introduce our second speaker this morning, Dr. Elizabeth Plant, and her presentation, Toxic Brain Injury, a Hidden Epidemic in the Opioid Crisis. Dr. Elizabeth Plant is a longtime resident of the Cowichan Valley, where she returned after completing an addiction medicine fellowship with the BC Centre on Substance Use. Currently, her roles include the Cowichan District Addiction Medicine Consult Service, the community for that service, outreach at the overdose prevention site, and in developing substance use supports for youth. Her interest in acquired brain injury and opioid overdose occurred after several clinical encounters with young, otherwise healthy folks who had been irrevocably changed by their overdose. As a part of her fellowship training, Elizabeth began exploring the scant research available regarding hypoxic brain injury and opioid overdose. Dr. Plant's contribution to the field of acquired brain injury are from the lens of being a substance abuse physician by training. Please welcome Dr. Elizabeth Plant.
Hello all. I'm going to share my slides, and I've had a little bit of technical difficulties. So as I share, I'm going to turn off my video, but I wanted to show my face first. All right. Okay, everyone. So I'm very pleased to have the ability to speak to you here today about toxic brain injury. I've called it a hidden epidemic within the opioid crisis. And thank you for the introduction. I am an addiction medicine physician, and I'm also a family doctor by training. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I am a settler on the unceded traditional territories of the Halkabinam people. So that's here in the beautiful Cowichan Valley. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. Okay, so what prompted my interest in this intersection between substance use and brain injury was a case that I encountered when I was working in a rapid access addictions clinic. we had an individual come in who had been hospitalized until about 4 days previously. They were in their early 40s. They had had an overdose several months before that was contaminated cocaine with fentanyl in it. The person had had prolonged downtime. They developed tissue breakdown from being down for quite a period of time, leaving them with a bit of a limp on one side. But the most profound thing that they had was the inability to form new memories since that event. This person was previously independent and living with a child, and now they could not remember why they went into the bathroom. And my preceptor and I, a preceptor in medicine is a teacher or someone who's supervising, were wondering what would happen to this individual if they didn't have their mom there with them. In between being released from hospital and coming to see me at the clinic, they had gone to 3 walk-in clinics and received prescriptions for hundreds of sedating medications, but they had no memory of where they were. I mean, the medications were, whether they had taken them, how they were stored. So this prompted me to think about, is this person safe to be living in the community? And if they're not, where would they go? So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of the context of the opioid crisis. I'm going to talk about hypoxic/anoxic brain injury. Fentanyl in specifics has some unique implications for how it might impact the brain, and also to talk about toxic leukoencephalopathy. I am going to translate some of these very medical terms for you when we get there. We'll talk about the cumulative impact of non-fatal overdose and then some suggestions for next steps. So normally in medicine, when we do a talk about a specific condition, we like to start with epidemiology, which is a bit about who gets the condition, who is likely to get to the condition, how many people have it, so that we have an understanding of the scope of the problem. So unfortunately, we do not have epidemiology for that. I think I just messed up my slides again. I don't know how that happened, sorry. There we go. I'm not going to touch my computer because I am not technologically savvy whatsoever. I will continue. So we don't have the epidemiology telling us who, how many, and what the scope of the actual problem is of hypoxic or overdose related brain injury actually is. So in terms of the opioid crisis, this slide was pretty much shown in every single academic talk I had during my addiction medicine fellowship. And basically what this is it's a slide from the BC coroner's report that shows all the unnatural causes of death in British Columbia. So we're talking about suicide, motor vehicle collisions, homicide, illicit and prescription drug overdoses. And as you can see, in between about 2015 and 2016, illicit drug overdose deaths did a massive increase. And that massive increase also paralleled the presence of fentanyl on autopsy. So here is another BC coroner's graph, which shows the percentage of illicit drug overdose deaths where fentanyl was detected. And as you can see, in 2015, 29% of deaths had fentanyl detected. And as of 2016, it was 67%. And now we're hovering in like the mid 80s in terms of how much of the opioid overdose deaths or the overdose deaths have fentanyl detected. And so this massive increase between 2015 and 2016 led to the then public health officer of BC, Dr. Perry Kendall, declaring the opioid crisis in April of 2016. And by the way, we're still in that crisis now, 4.5 years later. So this picture is from the Public Health Agency of Canada. And this is showing where the different population rates of illicit overdose deaths have occurred. So as we can see, British Columbia is at the epicenter of the overdose crisis, and the death rate is greater than 20 per 100,000 people. And this data is from 2020, from January until March. But we can see that pretty much every region is impacted. This picture is breaking down within British Columbia the different regions and how they are differentially impacted by illicit overdose deaths. So downtown east side is the only area within the 2019 graph that has a death rate of 30 or greater per 100,000. But if we look at 2020 so far, we see that a big portion of central and northern British Columbia, as well as central and southern Vancouver Island, have been similarly impacted. And of course, I take great interest in that because this is where I am, in the central island region. So who is being impacted by overdose deaths? Now, the coroner's data showed that the majority of folks who are dying, and this is across the general population, are men between ages 19 and 59, so pretty young, who were single and also who lived alone. So not our homeless folks so much dying, but people who lived alone. And about half of the folks, of the men in general, who died were employed at the times of their death. And most of those, more than half of those that were employed, worked in trades and transport. Hospitality is another industry that has been particularly hard hit for overdose deaths. So within our general understanding of who's impacted by the overdose deaths, we're looking at population in general, but different groups are impacted differently. This is a slightly older picture that is from the First Nations Health Authority. And back in 2018, when this was published, overdose deaths had started to plateau for the population in general. But as it was plateauing for the population in general, for folks who are First Nations, the death rates continued to rise. Individuals who are First Nations had 4.2 times more likely chance of dying from an overdose death compared to a non-First Nations person. And within First Nations folks, the women are impacted almost as much as the men, which is very different from the way our general population understanding has borne out with the statistics. So it's a different story for our First Nations folks. So I hope that gives you a really brief understanding of what the overdose crisis is, where it's happening, who it's happening to, and why people have been quite worked up about it. So I'm going to transition now, and I'm going to read you this quote because I think it's really important. And this is a quote from Dr. Delbert Dorscheid, who's a critical care physician at St. Paul's Hospital, who in June of 2019 was calling attention to people with brain injury subsequent to overdose. So he said, the death numbers are what's reported. And people get the impression that if you have a drug overdose, you get naloxone and you survive. Or you do not get naloxone and you die. But there is a lot of grayness in between. And so that's what I'm going to focus on now. So when people have an overdose but don't die, what happens to them? Well, we don't really know that much. This study that I'm showing here was done in 2008. So this is a much older study, pre-fentanyl era. Basically, what we got out of this is that most people had a benign course that went to hospital for an overdose related to heroin. 1 out of 224 people had a hypoxic injury. But what's important from this study that I think is applicable to our understanding is that repeat overdoses were common. So a small number of people, of individuals that they were tracking at this one institution, accounted for quite a large number of the overdose, the non-fatal overdoses that were being treated within hospital. So with non-fatal overdose, it's important to note that revival via naloxone does not necessarily restore a person to baseline. And naloxone is Narcan. It's the opioid blocker that, gets people breathing again. A non-fatal overdose is a risk for repeat or a further fatal overdose. And important to note is that an opioid overdose, which causes loss of consciousness, is by definition a hypoxic event. So one of the things that happened with my technological difficulties is that I had a lovely audio clip inserted here, because I really like to let this fellow speak for himself, but that's not working. So I'll just tell you a little bit about him. So Dayton Wilson suffered a hypoxic brain injury due to overdose when he was 21 years old. He stopped breathing for about 5 minutes. And now, several years later, is talking to media with him and his family about the difficulties that he's encountered and the lack of services to support someone like him. So he is now has difficulties with speech. He speaks very slowly. It's hard for him to find the right words, and he has difficulties with his balance. So he's able to live semi-independently now, and is able to work about 16 hours a week. But prior to his overdose was working in like high-rise steel construction, you know, where they run along the beams and whatnot. And now he will fall if he tries to walk on anything that's uneven. So it's a big change. I wish you could hear his voice and hear him explain that, but I encourage you to look into this young fellow. So he's someone who suffered a hypoxic brain injury. And we're going to talk about what that is, okay? And I'm talking fast, I know, but I have a lot of information I'm trying to share with you quickly. So hypoxic/anoxic, I'm just going to say hypoxic to be, for the sake of brevity. Basically, hypo means not enough. Anoxic is absence of oxygen. So what happens in a hypoxic or an anoxic brain injury is that there's inadequate oxygen due to decreased breathing. Within an opioid overdose, one of the mechanisms of opioids is that they decrease the central drive to breathe. So the person's respiratory center no longer triggers respiration. So a person doesn't get enough oxygen. What this results in when we have a highly metabolically active organ like the brain and not enough oxygen due to respiratory depression is you have an imbalance between supply and demand. And that really makes brain cells unhappy. And that can lead to a lot of negative sequelae. So my colleagues that work in stroke treatment have a saying, which is time is brain. And what we know is that neurons, which are one of the primary cell types within the central nervous system in the brain, they start to die within about 4 to 5 minutes deprived of oxygen. And there's actually some studies that show that neurons are negatively impacted in as little as 30 seconds without oxygen. So within stroke interventions, if we think about ischemic stroke, there's usually a clot or some kind of blockage, which is preventing blood flow with oxygen getting to a specific part of the brain. There's very clear algorithms as to how we quickly get folks to have clot removals, clot busters to restore the blood flow to the brain, because we know time is brain, and the more quickly we restore oxygen and blood flow to an area of the brain, the less likely there is to be lasting deficits. Now, within an overdose-related ischemia or deprivation of oxygen and blood, it is due to lack of oxygen due to respiratory depression, and sometimes that leads to a cardiac arrest as well, so they're not getting enough blood pumping to the brain to do the nutrient transfer. And here's where I'm going to give a shout out to why we need to have harm reduction services. So what I'm talking about is places, safe places where people can use substances. Before COVID, providing oxygen for people who had overdosed was one of the primary interventions before even naloxone. And CPR or chest compressions can also circulate oxygenated blood. And what that does is not only keep the individual alive, but is also saving their neurons, not just saving their life, but saving their brain. So if we think about when I was telling you a bit about who the opioid crisis is in general impacting most, we're thinking about young otherwise healthy men that are working in trades, transport, and hospitality for the most part. So this study looked at differential outcomes following successful resuscitation, so being brought back to life after a person has had a cardiac arrest due to opioid overdose versus other causes. And what they found within the single institution is individuals who had suffered an opioid overdose tended to be down for longer, so longer times without oxygen. They were less likely to receive any sort of CPR. They were younger and they had fewer medical comorbidities. So to think about what that looks like is we have young, otherwise healthy people who have prolonged time without oxygen. And then after their insult or injury to their brain, they will likely have quite a long life because they have an otherwise healthy body. So what happens to these folks? That's the big question. So within hypoxic brain injury, there are specific regions and areas that seem to be affected more than others. And the regions that are most affected are the deep brain structures. And these are gray matter or cell bodies that are deep within the center of the brain. And they are in control or related to really important functions like memory, consolidation, emotion, coordination, learning, movement. So it's like the hippocampus, thalamus, basal ganglia, nuclei, all these lovely names, but these areas seem to be particularly sensitive to any sort of hypoxic injury. So this very old study in late 1990s followed 10 individuals who had hypoxic brain injury following a heroin overdose. Not fentanyl, but a cousin. And what they found was that most of the individuals who had had a heroin overdose and were admitted to this brain injury rehabilitation center had lasting cognitive deficits. The cognitive deficits that people seemed to present with were around problem solving and social interactions. Two of the individuals later died from a subsequent opioid overdose. 3 people required assistance with daily living. And one individual who was 17 years old was admitted into a long-term care facility for folks who were, for seniors. Which, I mean, is that the right place for a 17-year-old to be living out the rest of their life? But I guess there aren't many other options. We also know from a study that looked at anoxic brain injury from all sorts of causes, it's not just opioid related, that folks who have anoxic brain injury or hypoxic brain injury tend to have worse measures than their counterparts who have traumatic brain injury. So people who have anoxic or hypoxic brain injury, there seems to be more impairment, less social integration, less quality of life. And if you compound that with pre-existing mental illness and substance use disorders, it's a very complex picture indeed. I'm wanting to go back to the case that inspired me to look into this topic. If you remember, it was a young person in their 40s, a person who didn't use opioids very much, but used cocaine and had an accidental overdose, and then was down for quite a while and now can't form new memories. Otherwise, this person appeared almost completely normal, apart from the limp on the leg. And I was like, why would there be just the memory that would be impacted? And the long-term memory was fine, like before the injury. So why would that be? So my preceptor and I looked at their imaging, and they had infarcts or death of tissue of the 2 hippocampi. Now, the 2 hippocampi are medial brain structures, the right in the middle, the deep nuclei that are associated with memory. And everything else in this person's scan was fine. Like, why would it just be those regions? Well, there's a theory that's emerging that potentially fentanyl itself can selectively damage hippocampi. There's a study that looked at 18 individuals between 2012 and 2017 at a hospital in Massachusetts who had severe anterograde, which means from the point of injury onward, amnesia, and all of them had bilateral hippocampal infarcts. This spawned some other research where they found that fentanyl and its analogs can cause rats to have seizures. Seizures are increased activity in the brain. They are synchronous electrical discharges. There's been some human studies that show that individuals who are having EEGs while having procedures done and then receive fentanyl, 19 out of 20 of these individuals suffered seizure-like activity in the hippocampi. So the theory is that in some vulnerable people, because it didn't happen for everybody, is that the fentanyl itself causes an increase in metabolism and energy utilization within the hippocampi. That's my dog snorting in the background, by the way. And if you couple an increase in metabolic activity with hypoxia, you have a brain region that's doubly vulnerable to having injury, because it's that difference between supply and demand which causes the neuronal injury. And if you have increased demand due to the fentanyl causing it, excitotoxicity we call it, plus decreased supply because of hypoxia, decreased drive to breathe, it could be that this is why we're seeing this unique injury pattern. But there's not just hypoxia. Like when I was approaching this talk, I was speaking to a colleague of mine and he was like, oh, I saw hypoxia. That's all it is for brain injury. But actually, that's not true. There's this cluster of conditions that are within the umbrella of toxic leukoencephalopathy. That's a mouthful. Leuko means white, encephalo, brain, pathy, badness, disease. So it's a disease affecting the white matter of the brain. And the white matter are the processes that have the different parts of the brain talking to each other. And instead of affecting the cell bodies where hypoxia acts, it affects these long processes that are covered in insulation. Now, you can have a toxic leukoencephalopathy presentation immediately after smoking heroin. That's where it was first identified. It's called chasing the dragon, but it can happen in a number of other contexts too. With toxic leukoencephalopathy, the prognosis, as in what's the expected outcome, it's more favorable than hypoxia and anoxia, which is pretty negative as to what I mentioned briefly, but it can be very variable. So some folks recover to a new baseline. Some folks recover to their old baseline, and some folks die. So it's kind of we don't know what's going to happen. And then there is this double doozy called delayed post-hypoxic leukoencephalopathy, which is where a person has a hypoxic event, say an overdose, they recover to some baseline, and then about on an average of 21 to 25 days later have some neurological relapse when the white matter develops the leukoencephalopathy. So that would combine both the hypoxia and the leukoencephalopathy, and the outcomes of that again are highly variable. So I wanted to mention briefly, and I know I'm getting close to being out of time, about multiple overdoses. So we know that multiple overdoses are common amongst those with opioid use disorder. I've talked to people who've had 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 overdoses. And what we know from research is that multiple overdoses are correlated with impaired social cognition. So particularly difficulty with understanding when what is being said is different from what's meant, like with humor and sarcasm. So what this suggests is that when we're working with these folks, is that we need substance use disorder treatment, which is straightforward and sincere. I never received training in that. I use humor in everything. And to think that I don't have the proper skills in order to work with folks to help them is distressing to me. And I would hope that we would develop some more integrated treatments for folks who have this social cognition difficulty. This article is from the Highwire magazine in June of 2019. Basically, what they're doing is comparing what happens with people who've had multiple overdoses to chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is the condition that can happen when people have repeated blows to the head, such as in boxing or football. People who work on the front line have certainly seen that folks they've known for long periods of time have changed and become more impulsive, more aggressive, difficulties with emotion regulation, and we don't really know what that looks like in terms of repeated overdose through the data. So what I wanted to highlight is that we have lack of appropriate treatments in terms of substance use disorder treatment for folks with brain injury treatment for people with substance use disorders. They're completely siloed. I'm not even including mental health here because that would make this way too much to say in my short 30 minutes. We have a lack of appropriate care facilities for those folks who have concurrent substance use disorder and brain injury that need long-term care. Because most of these folks will continue to use substances, and brain injury facilities often have a zero tolerance policy. We know that there's an increased risk of substance use disorder, further overdose injury and death. There's increased social isolation and marginalization, which perpetuates the substance use and the mental illness. And there can be criminalization of a medical issue, which these folks are overrepresented in our criminal justice system. This has resulted in the Brain Injury Association of America making their statement on non-lethal opioid overdose and acquired brain injury. I'm just going to touch on it briefly. The people who relapse to substance use after their brain injury, it detracts from the rehabilitation, and there's cognitive consequences to that. People who have a substance use disorder prior to a brain injury are 10 times more likely to relapse to using than an individual who doesn't have a brain injury and tries to stop using. We know that their decreased cerebral reserve means they're vulnerable to more damage, and we don't have an understanding of how many of these folks are there, and the treatments are siloed. So again, epidemiology, unknown. Dr. Perry Kendall estimates hundreds to thousands of people in BC affected this way. We don't have data. We don't have an agreement how to collect this data. There's been calls to have brain injury included as a diagnosis during opioid overdose hospitalizations, but that has not been adopted across the board. And we need to have this understanding of what the scope of the problem is in order to plan for interventions. So I'm finishing up really quickly. The opioid crisis has profound morbidity we are beginning to recognize. We have no epidemiology to quantify the scope of toxic brain injury. We need integrated treatment for brain injury and substance use disorder and mental health. And we need assisted living facilities for young, otherwise healthy individuals with hypoxic brain injury. Thank you so much. I'm going to get out of my slides. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I welcome your comments.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Plant. I think that despite the medical terminology, which some will understand more than others, this was a really important presentation. That indeed that there is a hidden epidemic of brain injury and in the world of substance use. Much of what we've been attempting to do with these sessions is to illuminate brain injury that is not seen in the community. So thank you very much. I was also particularly interested in the impact of fentanyl in the last 5 years. So thank you very much. Before we go to break, we'd like to hear from you. Now, the question we thought about was, what services do you know about in your community that relate to the opioid crisis? And that could be something that you're comfortable responding to. But also I'd invite you to say, what stands out for you from Dr. Plant's presentation this morning? So in the chat, give us your comments. Either address the services that you know about in your community that relate to the opioid crisis, or what stands out for you from Dr. Elizabeth Plant's presentation. We're now going to be taking our break. The chat will be open throughout the break. It's a 15-minute break, so we'll reconvene at 10:20 for the second half of our session today. During the break, I think we've included the word cloud images from our previous sessions for you to have a look at on slides during the rotation. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to Drs. Higginbottom and Plant for opening our session today. We'll see you back at 10:20 for the second half of today's program. And welcome back. I hope you had a chance to stretch your legs and get some refreshment. We've got a really packed second half for you. But before we start that, we thought there were some really interesting comments in the chat. We will save all of the chat comments and read all of them. A few that stood out for us. One is that people are falling through the cracks at a disturbing rate. And that's one of the reasons, the impetus for this whole series of presentations is that we really want to begin to looking at the needs of people and how they fall through the cracks. The second point is to focus on needs, not on diagnosis, because diagnosis doesn't always tell you the whole picture. And thirdly, that we need to influence policy and practice in our communities and provincially. And that will certainly be an important part of the road forward for the Heads Together think tank. Before we start our next session, I'd like to do another poll, and this is one we've done each time to find out who is attending our virtual session. So I'd ask Nikki to launch the next poll, and we'd like you to indicate who you are. Are you a survivor? Are you a family member, a service provider, a funder, or an interested observer? So we'll just do a quick check on who's attending today. We know there'll be a wide variety of people who watch the recording when it gets to the website, but this is for today. And as the votes are coming in, I'll ask Nikki to close the poll when she feels that there's a sufficient number of votes have come in. So far, it looks again like we've got a majority of service providers. So we're really happy to see you here today again, and hope that this series is helping to expand your awareness on all the various topics we've presented. We have a full second half, and I'd like to begin the second half by introducing our first speaker, Patty Flaherty, and her presentation, Housing and Wraparound Services. Patty Flaherty has worked in the field of brain injury and rehabilitation for 26 years. Before joining Connect as executive leader in 2007, she was a senior operating officer at Vancouver Coastal Health, responsible for the site operations of the GF Strong Rehabilitation Center. Patty has a degree in physical education, a master's of education, and completed the Executive Health Leadership Program at the Rotman School of Management. Patty has helped develop and promote Connect's life redesign model, an approach that emphasizes social capital and resident-centered goal setting in a creative and flexible environment. Patty is a founding member of the Interdependence Network and is the past chair for the BC Injury Association. She served as chair for the Pacific Coast Brain Injury Conference from 2009 and was on the steering committee from 1996 to 2005. Patty's been an active member of the Canadian College of Health Service Executives since 2005 and has been a mentor for their executive mentoring program. In her downtime, Patty enjoys time with family and friends, yoga, the outdoors, great music, and traveling. She counts her father as one of her greatest mentors. And a fun fact, her nickname is Boo. And so I'd like to welcome Patty Flaherty and her presentation, Housing and Wraparound Services. Patty.
Hello. Hello, everybody. I think I'm good. I think you can see me. This is like super weird to be here, but very happy to be here. I first want to say this is my first presentation online, as it is for probably lots of people, in a way that's sort of bigger than within my organization or with a partner or two. So yeah, so anyway, thank you very much. You can see Gracie in the background. That's my dog. And I love her to bits. So happy to be here. I'm going to share my screen. So just give me a second. And to start things off, I want to first thank Janelle for your leadership, for getting this going. This is tremendous. Unbelievable amount of energy that you have in leadership in our province. And I'm just delighted that you asked me to be a part of it. So I hope I bring something to the table that people feel is worthy. It was a real throwback to see John Higgenbottam. You were one of the reasons I moved from Ontario to British Columbia about 25 years ago, and was the lead for BC Rehab at the time I joined that organization. So it's so fun to see you today, John. I was asked by Janelle, who actually coined my title of my presentation, just so you know. No one gets in the way of Janelle. You just sort of say, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am. For sure, I will happily do this. She asked me to talk about our life redesign model at Connect, which I'm very happy to do. I've been working with Connect for about 14 years, was at the Health Authority prior to Vancouver Coastal Health. And the work that I do now, I think everything I did prior led me here. So I'm supposed to be here. We are an organization, Connect Communities. We've got four sites, 4 locations. We provide a home for people to redesign their lives after their brain injury and stroke. And we work with them to transition back to their homes and communities. There are some people that live with us long-term, but our sort of jazz is that we like to see people going back to their homes and communities. So we do our best to make that happen. We have wraparound services around individuals as they redesign their life, but they guide this. They're the ones that direct their life redesign. And we're a people first service. So one of the themes of this morning is that we're not diagnostic first or diagnosis first. So of course, brain injury and stroke is sort of the focus for many of our locations, but we see lots of people with lots of different health issues, and many of our folks that we support are living with addiction and mental health. So a little bit of history about Connect. We've been around for about 27 years. Our first location was in Langley. We have 5 or 6 group homes in Langley. We work in partnership with WorkSafe BC, Fraser Health, and other health authorities to provide services there. And we work in partnership with the folks in our communities to make sure that the services and the lives that people are redesigning are full and active. Of course, prior to COVID, it was a very different scene. Our focus on community is immense. Our life redesign model focuses on helping people to build healthy community. Of course, we've had to sort of rethink all of that during COVID. Our second location is in Lake Country. So Connect Lake Country, in partnership with Interior Health, opened in 2009. We have 28 of our 42 bedrooms in Lake Country are funded through Interior Health. The other are funded through individualized contracts. The kind of location, it's not a group home location. It's like a townhouse or a condo complex. We have 6 homes and each home has 7 bedrooms. So it is group living. It's just a different kind of sort of campus. And just recently, I see a typo here that Hamilton, Ontario is our first out of province location. Hamilton's also my hometown. So there was a lot of social capital that was used in Ontario to help kind of make that happen. And we opened just last year. So 2019, we're a baby still, and opening up a new business in a new province. And then having COVID and a number of other issues, it's been quite the journey for us. But our partnership with Hamilton Health Science is very strong. Again, similar to our Lake Country location, we have 28 of our 42 bedrooms are funded through Hamilton Health Sciences. And we're building to grow other partnerships in Ontario to offer our service in the other 14 bedrooms to other funders in that province. So I've been spending a lot of time in Hamilton. I am here in Vancouver right now as I'm speaking to you, but Hamilton has been my main focus for the last few years to kind of get that up and running. And most recently, this past year, we opened a home in Richmond. So it's a bit unique compared to our other locations. It's a partnership with WorkSafe BC. There are 5 bedrooms there. 2 are funded directly through WorkSafe BC, and the others are open to other people in the province who are interested. This is a pilot project, and the pilot project is focused on people with active addiction and mental health issues, as well as injury from a workplace accident. So a variety of different kinds of workplace accidents and injuries in this home. And the idea is to wrap our life redesign model around this population and work in partnership with Actum Health, which is a holistic and interdisciplinary mental health and addiction service in Richmond. They work in partnership with us for those folks from WorkSafe to build a life redesign plan that is very, very inclusive of whatever sort of active treatment they need for their mental health and addiction. So a little bit different. We're really hopeful that this is going to really show the power of the life redesign model through partnership, that we can try and make lives better and really get some great results for people to be able to build healthy lives. A little bit about what our life redesign model is about. I am going to show a video, a few-minute video at the end, just to kind of give you a sense from people who live with us and work with us from their lens. But to give you a bit of background, our life redesign model, we were privileged to get a leading practice by Accreditation Canada in 2016. Although it is ever evolving. So what they read in 2016 might be a little bit different than it is now, because we're very open to evolving it as we go. And every person is different, so it sort of shapes itself. But it's built on these 5 bullets that you see. The picture to the right also gives you a sense of sort of the journey and how we focus. But our culture is built around personal accountability, around taking risks. It's about building relationships and using your social capital to do what you can to build positive relationships and build meaning in your life, in the community, and in your homes. So that's kind of a real focus for us. It's really important that our services are planned around what a person wants. There's no prescription. It's really about working with a person, thinking or listening deeply to who they are, what their story is, where they've come from, where they want to go, what their goals are, and help them to shape a life redesign model or a life redesign plan and services around what they want most in life. They also are the drivers of this. They're the ones that we need to listen to help support and not lay on them what we believe to be the most important things. So we work in partnership for sure with the people that we're supporting. And our service plans leverage neuroplasticity. So we've heard a little bit about that today. We leverage neuroplasticity in pursuing people's goals in real life, non-institutional, flexible, creative environments. And it's a doing with coaching approach. We have blended job roles and a team of rehab professionals. And one of the key things is we don't hire for qualifications, although some of our roles and jobs have qualifications that are necessary. We really hire for fit, personality, values, and our values that connect are really driving all of our decisions and all of our approach. So that's super important. So just to kind of give you a snapshot of kind of how it works. Our homes are sort of self-supporting. So we work in partnership with the people that live there to run a household. So we don't have typical institutional things like housekeeping, catering, that kind of thing. So we work in partnership with people to run the household, to make decisions on how to run a household, and that's embedded into their life redesign plans. And the partnership is super important. So the people that we hire are absolutely not hired to be large margin charges. It's not about that. It's about finding ways with people to live in a home, to deal with the things that come up every day, and to find solutions. To help people to take risks is so important. I think about my journey in my life, and without taking risks, often you don't move forward. So for some reason, the health system really likes to wrap people up in safety blankets and make sure that they're not doing anything to harm themselves, which is totally fine. But sometimes what that means is risks are not allowed. Our doors are wide open. We work with people, except for through COVID, of course. But our doors are wide open, which means people can come and go. They're not locked in. We don't have a locked unit. We don't have a locked home. We help to support people in other ways to stay safe, if that's necessary. So digging into what people want and where they want to be and who they want to be helps to guide the doors that are open to them. Our coaches we have a number of support coaches helping sort of that person with their life redesign plan, and they are crucial to running Connect. We have life redesign coaches who work directly with our individuals in our home. So, and like I said, we don't hire with qualifications. So in some of the other environments you might be familiar with, some of the folks that would be working in these roles would be care aides, for example. We're hiring people with lots of different backgrounds, lots of different qualifications, lots of different energy and gifts that they bring to the table. So we do lots of our own education and training for things that need to be done. But in terms of the need for them to be a care aide, it's absolutely not necessary. And our coaching resource team includes a number of support coaches and a number of rehab professionals. So all of our titles, as you can see, are coaching titles. And everyone who we hire are expected to work closely with the people that are living with us. So although you're an administrative coach, and so therefore you're helping to kind of run the sort of back end of our organization, you're also very involved in helping to support people to move their life redesign plans forward and meet their goals. So it's a very integrated way to work, a very collaborative way to work. It's very strange not to feel the energy of the group that's listening and to feed off of you. That's probably what I'm better at as a presenter. So hopefully I'm not falling on my face. I want you to know that you can reach out anytime. Here's my contact information. And what I'm going to end with is a video that'll hopefully give you a really good sense of our life redesign model.
All of us have times in our life where we either intentionally choose to change our life and have to redesign our own lives. And sometimes that's by choice, and sometimes it's traumatic and not by choice. So whether it's choosing to end a relationship, moving to a new community, whether you've lost your job, adding the challenge of having a brain injury or stroke into that, it's really hard.
I think the life redesign model is effective because it's based on this one belief that every person is resourceful, whole, and wise.
If you don't know their story, you don't really know what motivates them.
That's where we start, is at the beginning, which is tell us about who you are and what makes you tick.
And it puts them at the center of what they want to do in their future. And it puts us walking alongside of them and encouraging them to get to where they want to be.
Ultimately, it's the resident driving the process completely. That makes everything that they do here a little bit more meaningful.
Who they are before their injury is a big part of who they are afterwards.
Knowing their past, it helps you work with them to develop a better future.
Connect encourages you to come up with your own activities. All you have to do is come up with the idea and they can make arrangements.
We meet them where they're at and we help to coach them to find a way to live a life after their brain injury that is meaningful to them. We need to listen closely. We need to ask really curious questions so we can help to understand what's important to someone and then coach them along the way to sort out how they can get what they want.
We have members that are going to art class or going up on hikes with the CRISP program and or head to the mall or going out for a movie or going bowling. So many things here that we do as a team so that when I leave here, I'm connected to that stuff and keep participating in the different things that I've already been connected with.
Connect gives residents the freedom to make choices that will help them succeed within the walls or within the community. And we provide supports to keep them safe, but the risks they take are their own and the life that they build is their own.
And I think what that difference is again back to our culture and offering an environment and a place for people to really get an opportunity early on in their injury where they can build the skills and the resolve and the confidence to get back into their community and give back to their community and live life with their families and find joy in their life.
It's not a prescribed plan for everyone, but it is really about the person and how can we meet you where you are and achieving the goals that are important for you.
Ontario represents a national exposure for us. That what we're doing is not only special locally, provincially, but now it's special nationally. And we take a huge responsibility in succeeding there. And hopefully more Connect-like places evolve in all the provinces across the country.
The people that work here tend to be able to laugh at mistakes and feel good about failure because failure is your first steps in learning.
I would say my favorite part of my job is to sit down with a resident and just hear their story because each day the story gets better and better.
I think our values are what drive the culture. Respect, flexibility, joy, passion, learning, creativity.
You know, right from the get-go, it's about what does the individual want from their experience at Connect.
To see people go through this transition, we don't focus on what's wrong, we really focus on what's right. And how can we make that better?
It's stretched so much my understanding of what helping people is.
That's what I love about Connect is that we don't try to say no. We say, okay, so this is your goal. Let's see what we can do to try to get you there.
What I really like is when we set goals and we work together and we achieve it. You know, I'm so excited.
I think back to the word connect, it's exactly what I'm doing. Connecting from my hospital life to home. I'm so lucky that there's places like this that exist that I can make it into.
I'm just very thankful for Connect. This is the answer here. No, and it's happening.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of who we are as an organization and how we focus. And not hearing anything, I really hope that you could see that, like at least see the video. A few of the things that I don't think I touched on that I just want to reinforce is the Connect Richmond location in partnership with WorkSafe. One of the key differences of that location is we are actually an active addiction a detox and mental health home. So those things, especially the detox side of things, is not something we do in our other locations. So so there's a little bit of a different focus, of course, in that house. And of course, there are so many people who we support throughout our locations that have significant mental health, significant addiction issues, whether they're active or not, and other things, of course, that come into play. And of the days way back, this is not like, you know, sort of what we knew early in my career of sort of what someone would present like who has a brain injury to support. Life is very complicated for people, and any kind of focus on specific diagnosis is just not going to help us out at all. And really, it's about people. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm very open to have you reach out to me if you have any questions at all. And Janelle, I hope I did you proud, and I said what you wanted me to say. Congratulations on this think tank. It's tremendous work, and it was a pleasure to be involved.
Thanks very much, Patty. Yes, indeed, your presentation certainly met what we were looking for today's presentation. We're looking at ways to support individuals in their community, and the Connect Life Redesign model does that beautifully. I think it's noteworthy that you take an appreciative approach and you work with people through learning and coaching. And I've got to admit, I'd love to have a play coach. That just sounded wonderful to me. So positive, so forward-looking.
I'm so sorry
yes,
that
Patty,
you didn't get
your presentation was perfect today.
Oh.
I'd like to now introduce our next speaker, Scott Froome, and his presentation, Mental Health, Substance Use, Case Management Models. Scott grew up living between Gabriola Island and the Fraser Valley. He has 3 teenagers and is happily married and living in Nanaimo. Scott has been working for Island Health since 2008 in mental health and addictions. He is presently a case manager, counselor in Parksville, working on an adult community services outreach team. Scott's volunteer work includes working with a disaster psychosocial team for the BC Provincial Health Authority through Health Emergency Management BC. Scott and his team were awarded the BC Above and Beyond Award for services given during the Prince George Fire in 2017. Fun fact, Scott is currently a scouter, a scout leader, and has been in scouting for the last 6 years. Please join me in welcoming Scott Froome.
Hi there. Okay. So again, my name's Scott Froome. I'm a counselor on ACSS team offering outreach services with the Island Health Authority. I'm here today to discuss case management models that the health authorities use to offer services in the community. I'd first like to begin by acknowledging that I am on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, the Snoonamuk First Nations. Sorry, I mixed the two up. The Snoonamuk Nation. So let's get started. The beginning of my slide. To go forward, the case management models here in Canada start off with a basic definition of standards. And it is a collaborative, client-driven process for the provision of quality health and support services through the effective and efficient use of resources. Case management supports the client's achievement and goals with complex social and physical environments. So these case management follows an approach that is always client-centered and a collaborative support clients' rights. It's purposeful, strives for cultural competency, promotes personal independence, and improves quality of life, and encourages personal and family responsibility in the planning and provision of care, supporting accountability. And again, that underlying principle is the belief that the individuals want to be responsible to care for themselves and their families as long as they're able to do so. And this is what we tend to do as case managers. We go in and we try to facilitate and promote self-care management. And a lot of these services are arranged to address the gap between the client's healthcare needs and their personal and family ability to self-manage. All right, so those are my models. Now, I just thought I'd jump right in here and start discussing those models. So funding from the province of BC and federally have three traditional outreach models, which are the ACSS and ICMS and the ACT teams. These will be my main focus today. Recently, there has been an increased funding for homeless and substance use focused outreach teams. I will quickly review some of the other services available, such as the community response teams, which work well for crisis on a day-to-day basis, including transitional case management for short-term care. These are the type of teams that would typically partner with the RCMP for a wellness check. These are run by the health authority, and referrals usually come in by either neighbors or a fax from the RCMP, and we partner with them to go out and to speak and to hopefully stabilize someone who's not having a good day. And that may look like assisting them to go to a hospital for further assessment or helping them get their meds. It really depends on those clients and their needs. ASTAT counseling services offer a myriad of services such as DBT, CBT, session-based counseling, and additional facility-based addiction services that offer referrals to treatment centers, hospital-based services such as psychiatric units, psychiatric emergency services. And these treatments are really important to be available and there for you, but they're not in an outreach capacity. Adult community services is what my background is. So my personal background has been working on the ACSS team with Island Health since 2008. Long-term treatment and support for adults over 19 years to over 100 years of age with major mental illness is what our main model is capturing that age. If the client is over 65 and has significant cognitive issues such as dementia, then they might be transferred to a geriatric team. I've had clients 17 years of age and presently over 80 presently that I serve and assist and collaborative for their day-to-day needs. Adult community services is a community-based mental health and substance use service designed to provide services and support to adults with persistent mental illness and substance use issues. Some of these diagnoses may include schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And ACS team members work together with a person experiencing mental illness and substance use concerns to achieve mental wellness and recovery goals. Some of the services include assessments. These assessments actually can be quite detailed. Such as we do a mini mental health status, we do a suicidality check, potential for violence or harm, a Maslow hierarchy of needs, and a psychosocial assessment and falls risk. Other teams may have more or less of these daily assessments, but it really gives us a picture of where the client is sitting in that moment and how we can best make clinical decisions to support them in the community. Other assessments that might be completed on a monthly or as needed basis include like a clinical profile, which is used to refer clients to other services such as mental health housing or addiction treatment. Client satisfaction survey. It's good to see where the client is sitting so that and how happy they are with our service, so we know where to improve and offer that service in more detail to them. Substance use assessment. We also do a quick assessment on that substance use every time we talk to the client. Once you have that therapeutic rapport, it's really quick and easy, and you know how high their use is and maybe what kind of stabilization you might need to do for them in the background. And of course, we have a MHSU treatment plan, which we develop in hands with the client and collaboratively. And that treatment plan, we work together with them to work through. Quite often, that treatment plan may include medications. These days, we also do a COVID-19 screening. What gets in the media a lot these days is also our hoarding scale assessment. So we go in and do an assessment for someone who may have boxes right to the roof and the rafters and up and down the halls. And it's good to know where we're sitting with that client when we receive the referral. And then we assist them with their mental health issues as well as how their hoarding is through that scale assessment, and help them remove some of those boxes and let them pass on and clean up their area and improve their overall life and health. General anxiety disorder, or the PHQ-9 depression screening tools, many other assessments that we do. Yes, so Medication reviews and monitoring is done on contact with the client. As usual for clients on oral medication. So for their oral medication, it's quite supplied usually in bubble packs, so they don't miss their medication. They can see on a daily basis how to take their meds, and we can support them where the med is being missed. And this increases the conversational why and how to improve adherence to their meds. Many of my personal clients receive a depot medication injection, the most prevalent at present being the Abilify Maintena, Invega Sustenna, and the 90-day Invega Trinza. Some of the others presently being offered are Clopixel, Fluoxetol, or a traditional Haldol. Crisis interventions, helping the person to move through their crisis situations. When clients are referred to me from the local hospital, quite often they have been needing stabilization, and once they've stabilized in the hospital, they need further stabilization in the community. Many of my clients may still do harm to themselves and others, and so they come out under the BC Mental Health Act. And that BC Mental Health Act assists them to get back into the hospital right away if they need it. It allows them to admit that client. People who are certified under the BC Mental Health Act can be treated involuntarily for their mental disorder, of course. However, they do have an option to go to a review board, and that review board will assess them and decide if the Mental Health Act is overreaching and we should restabilize them back at their home. And I've assisted many clients going through the review board process. Sometimes they don't pass, and then we have to alter their treatment plan to better support them. And throughout this process, we're consultating with other teams and organizations as well as the client, and navigating the systems that are often applied to our service tasks and not sitting behind a desk in the traditional sense. So when a client is needing something, we're quite often out there doing it with them. Counseling referrals are done by the case managers, but often we offer basic counseling such as cognitive behavioral therapy or session goals, such as discussing the stressors around their addiction and skills they could apply to cope better with these stressors. A session with a case manager may also include transporting the client to, say, a driver's license service office to replace their lost driver's license or a BC health card while discussing medication side effects that they might be experiencing. Throughout the process, we're always providing education to not only the client or their family around mental illness and treatment options, around skill development and ways to cope or build their toolbox with the skills they need to continue on their recovery. Providing assistance and support around the person's wellness and recovery goals while advocating for the individuals and link them to the services and resources that they require. These goals could be reintroducing the client to community recreation services, such as a one-time appointment to the pool, to register them or support them going in for a first time. So these are, again, adult community support services that we offer through my program. However, when we go to the other service models, they're slightly different. What role does the family doctor play in care when they're receiving services from an ACSS team? So the person's family doctor or nurse practitioner remains as their primary care provider, and as such will be kept informed of and contribute to their treatment and or recovery plans. Once the person, their family, and the ACSS team determine that the person is well enough and no longer require ACSS services, their mental health team and care will be transitioned back to their family doctor or nurse practitioner. Eligibility. How do you get attached to these programs? Well, the ACSS team provides services and support to individuals with severe and persistent mental illness and substance use concerns who encounter negative consequences of their illness. That was what's required for the eligibility requirement. However, the referral is usually done either through a local mental health center. A client can self-refer, or they can go in the hospital, or they can have their doctor do a referral for them to the team. It's actually quite easy to be attached to an ACSS team once they fit the eligibility model to help them stabilize in their day-to-day life. So that was that model. Now I thought we'd, from the ACSS model, go to the intensive case management team model. So the intensive case management team provides a team-based model of care serving individuals with severe substance use and who may be mentally ill and or homeless. The ICM team provides comprehensive assessment, treatment, rehabilitation, and support activities that include housing brokerage. So housing brokerage is quite often connecting the client and helping them find the housing they need. That's anywhere from looking it up in the paper to doing a referral to mental health housing facility to stabilize their homelessness and make them have the household that they require to get better. Assessing need for facilitating and access to the medical care include primary care, so the doctors also will be referred to for their treatment plan, substance use counseling, and access to treatment, life skill support, skill building, grocery shopping. These are all things that the ICMS teams do. They're there for right down to the smallest thing to the biggest thing in that person's life, and they're supporting them throughout the process. Now, connecting the person to community resources, we also do the transports. And transporting them to these appointments and supporting and encouraging them to make the right choices for them so that they have a healthy lifestyle. And of course, the referral can be done through local hospital. Quite often they do an assessment for the ACSS team, and then from that assessment it is defined if they need a more intensive service, such as an ICMS team or an ACT team, which I'll get to shortly. So an ACT team case management model. So the ACT serves clients with serious mental illness that are complex and who have very significant functional impairment. Often they experience high addiction and comorbidity. ACT model is delivered by a group of mental health staff from a variety of disciplines who work as a team and provide the majority of the treatment services. So quite often on the street, you'll see a rehab worker working with a case manager on site. That case manager could be a nurse, or as some people say, a SPO, someone with like a degree in counseling, master's degree, and they are with that client, assisting them on a day-to-day basis with the ICM model. Many people feel their loved ones need this level of service, but typically it's reserved for clients that have a high level of engagement with the legal system and medical system, and they're struggling, harming themselves and others on a daily basis. That's why they need to be assessed daily. It's a high cost for the client, high cost to the community if they're not receiving that level of service. And it's very important that the ACT team is involved with them. And it's tailored, their treatment is tailored specifically to what they require for that day. And quite often these clients may be rotating in and out of a shelter, and the ACT team will be there engaging with them, making sure they get into that shelter and continue to help them with any long-term housing issues they may have. ACT team continued, of course. There are a lot of specifics on the ACT team that come up. People want to know what to do and how to support these clients and how to do the referral process. Again, the referral process is through the hospital or in person. Quite often the person is assessed through the ACSS branch before going on to this level of service. This will also encourage the client and assist them collaboratively in a way to stabilize them in the community, so they're not engaging the legal system as well as the health system as much, and they're getting everything they require to be stable in their own lives. So that was a quick snapshot. I think I ran through it a little too fast. So, but those are the three models that I was focusing on today. So it was the ACSS model, the intensive case management model, as well as the ACT team model. I'm sure there's many questions, and I'll try to answer them off to the side. Sorry for speeding through it. I'm a fast talker. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much, Scott. Really appreciate your presentation. With your presentation on community teams and Patty's presentation on life redesign, we really wanted to show two different models for supporting people in communities. So for reinforcing communities where people live with some of these disorders. I realized that I neglected to ask for your comments, the audience comments, after Patty's presentation. So if you have a moment, I noticed that Stephanie put a note in the chat to indicate in the chat what housing and wraparound services are available in your community. I know that Stephanie put that in, so it's great to have a support team. Thank you very much, Steph. And also, we've heard from our production team that we will embed the Patty's video into the recording. So when it goes up on the website, you'll see the video, the full video there. Thanks, Scott, for your presentation on community teams and case management. I know that that's a really important way of supporting individuals in our communities. And in the chat, if those of you watching, if I can ask you to do 2 in sequence, what community support teams are in your community? What do you know about community support teams in your community? So both housing and wraparound and community support teams. Again, it's really important for us to hear from you. It's now, having heard about supports in the community, it's now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, someone who's here with us in the studio, Derek Forsyth, and his presentation, To Care is to Cure. Derek is a survivor of brain injury. One interesting thing about Derek's story is that his brain injury resulting from a car crash caused a pause in his life. This pause lifted him from a world of alcohol and substance abuse, prison and homelessness to where he is today, a man who has completely turned his life around by taking charge of his rehabilitation and recovery. Derek knew that the support being offered to him was the key to opening the door to a new life, the life he had always wanted. Derek's story illuminates the cracks in our systems and shines a spotlight onto the amazing outcomes that happen when communities have the resources to lift and walk away or walk with success. Fun fact, as a survivor of brain injury and someone who has overcome adversity, Derek met briefly with Prince William during the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's tour in 2016. Please join me in welcoming Derek Forsyth.
Hello, everybody. Hello, my name is Derek Forsyth, and I just want to briefly qualify. I'm probably one of those persons that's fallen through the cracks. I've been to over 20 prisons, probably well over 20 recovery houses, at least 5 mental institutions. I'm over 50 years old, and my addiction started back in my 20s. Sorry. Okay, what I wanted to talk about is we heard a lot of nice things about people getting help with brain injury and recovery and mental illness. The reality of the problem is if I had a guy right now beside me that wanted help and was struggling, it would take me at least 2 weeks to get him into a place. And in those 2 weeks, he could die, overdose. It's impossible for him to stop using drugs because of the addictive nature. The first thing we got to do is clean the person of these maladies. I have now 9 years of sobriety. I haven't smoked a crack rock or stuck a needle in my arm or taken a pill or a drink in over 9 years. And that was the first step in recovery for me. I still need support. I'm struggling. You know, even after 9 years, I'm struggling to become a normal person in society. And I can't find the help. I can't find a counselor. I can't find a psychologist because I got no money. I don't make enough money. I once again falling through the cracks. There's many people like me. So society invests all this money into getting somebody off the street, and they put them in, you know, the recovery house or prison, and the person gets released from these institutions without any support whatsoever. And then society has to pay all over again to put them through the jail, to put them through the recovery house. There has been a lot of money invested in me and these other people I'm talking about that live in my building. They have suffered from brain injury. Now they suffer for loneliness. They don't have any job. You know, they don't have any purpose in life. They're just warehoused now in a building. I would like to see more supports for these types of people like me that are trying, you know, trying to better myself. Now I'm able to work part-time. I work for the CRIDGE as a community support worker, all because the CRIDGE never took their eyes off me. They helped me every single step of the way. They didn't say, okay, you're an alcoholic, you need to go to AA. You're a drug addict, you need to go to NA. You got mental illness, you need to go see this doctor and get pills. No, they were like, we're gonna help you do whatever you need to do to get where you wanna be today. And today, like I said, I'm still struggling, but I'm much more better off than I was before. I have a car, I have a motorcycle, I have a job, I have a place to live, and it all started with getting a place to live. Having a stable home that I can call my own. That's where it really starts from. You know, society is doing the best they can. I see that there's a lot more improvements than there was 20 years ago, but the fact of the matter is, like I said, if I have an addict or a person with brain injury or an alcoholic beside me and they want help, it's going to take at least 2 weeks. And we can't afford to have those 2 weeks. You know, those 2 weeks is costing society more money, like emergency services, the hospitals, the nurses, the medication, the judges, the lawyers, the court costs, the jail fees. You know, most people now that are on the street, if they really want help, the only place they can go to is jail, because jail will hold them long enough to sober up. And it's sad when a person has to go to jail to get help, because jail's not there to get help. Jail's there to deter crime. If you walk into a prison and you walk on a range, I guarantee you 80% of the people that are in that jail, in that prison, have mental illness, drug addiction, alcoholism, some sort of malady, like I said, they need help for. And releasing them into the community without support is costing the community double of what they would normally pay if they just followed that person and gave them exactly what they needed to get help. Like I need a psychologist, you know, am I gonna get one? Who knows, you know, and yeah. So I'm struggling too, and you know, with the COVID, it's still, you know, a lot of people with brain injury are struggling in addictions, and I'm glad that there's being something done about it today, that there's more people involved, and I'm really happy that the CRIDGE is using me as a sounding board to make people aware that there is a great need for these services. That's really all I have to say right now. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Derek. I think we heard a lot in what you said. We heard about a delay. We heard about services not matched to needs, perhaps to diagnosis, and that needs don't stop after the acute treatment is over, that community support is needed long after the initial injury. So thank you very much, Derek, for your presentation today. 9 years later, support is still needed. So community, reinforcing communities, being able to establish and maintain supporting communities is absolutely critical. And Derek, your voice is important to us today. Thank you. Our last speaker this morning is someone who helped us launch the virtual think tank on October 20th, Jerry Bemister-Williams. Those of you who were with us that day will remember Jerry's moving presentation about her experience with brain injury, mental health, and addiction. Jerry's presentation today is called Offering Solutions to Reinforcing Indigenous Communities. Jerry is a behavioral scientist and a recognized expert on trauma, adverse childhood experiences, substance abuse, and related issues. Much of Jerry's career as a criminologist has focused on the connections between crime, trauma, and substance abuse. This specific knowledge has made her a useful resource on issues of mental health in the Canadian justice system. Her expertise has been used by national and provincial governments. Part of why Jerry has committed much of her life to this work is because she experienced the social stigma and barriers of a person living with significant PTSD. She was written off as a troubled child after a series of traumatic and abusive events in her childhood. we feel that Jerry is the perfect speaker to be our final speaker before our wrap up. Please join me in welcoming Jerry Bannister-Williams to today's session. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you. Oki, everyone. That is Blackfoot for hello. I want to acknowledge that for me today, I'm on the traditional territory of the Treaty 7 people here in southern Alberta. That is the Blackfoot people. So I want to just for a moment just thank everyone for coming together. The last speaker, Derek, you know, it's such an invaluable resource to have a person with the different lived experiences, somebody who's been through these systems. You know, oftentimes there is a top-down approach from individuals who have the intent to make things better, and that's not often the best way. I think that we've all discovered in these last weeks about collaboration and how important that is. And collaboration just isn't with the systems. Collaboration involves representatives from within the systems. So we can really ask people what they need, what were the barriers, at which point could an intervention have done you know, change the trajectory and the course of where you needed to be, or how could we have met your needs differently? You know, off again and on again for myself working on the front line. You know, I've heard it time and time again, almost daily, about the barriers and how the systems don't work. And it doesn't matter where you are. You can be in a First Nations community, you can be in government, nonprofit. We take a look at, you know, the downtown east side, for example, and there are, I think, well over 186 agencies within that floor block radius. About $10 million of government funds go into that particular 4-block radius, and there's duplication of services. And you know, we need to have whatever's available on demand. So yeah, there's a place for harm reduction. There's a place potentially for safe supply. There's a place for supervised consumption. There's a place for detox, stabilization, and treatment on demand. Do they belong in the same block? Do they belong in the same corridor? Maybe not. You know, the closing of Riverview, I think, has really impacted not only the mental health system, but also the jail system, because where are those individuals going? I believe it was Scott who spoke about that as well, and Dr. HIGENBOTTAM. I think we're all on the same page. So where do we go? And, you know, for today's presentation, talking about reinforcing and solutions for First Nations communities specifically, this solution that I'll talk about today and present or offer can also be used in any setting, really, to meet the needs of individuals whose needs are not getting met, period. If you want to call them marginalized, homeless, whatever demographic or category that we put these individuals in, we all know that what we're doing isn't working. So, you know, it's kind of like, I'll use this analogy. There's a lot of talk about indigenization of curriculum in academic institutions, for example. And if you look at an academic institution, it's a colonial institution. So you can't decolonize a colonial institution by indigenizing curriculum. You can raise awareness and those types of things, but it's the same idea. You know, we all realize that there's an issue, but what is our strategy? So, you know, first and foremost, we must understand that all communities are different. So whether we're talking about a First Nations community, we're talking about the downtown east side, we're talking about a small First Nations community outside of Prince George, we're talking about, you know, places like where I live in Strathmore, 13,000 people, small town Alberta. Like, these kinds of solutions can can work. And those kinds of solutions are what we call a therapeutic community. So many of you in your work have probably heard about the Portugal model and decriminalization and all of that. And I think what the myth or the misnomer is about the Portugal model, even though they've had great success, is that the foundation of that success is the therapeutic community model. And then you have the model here in the middle, and you bring resources to that model, you change legislation to that model. So essentially what we're looking at with the therapeutic community is exactly that. So here in Alberta, the UCP government has sorry, the mouth gets a little dry when you're talking. So the UCP government here in Alberta has offered up these therapeutic communities as a way in which to provide long-term care to a variety and a very diverse demographic of individuals. So ideally, through the work that I've done over the last 15 years and the different panels I've sat on, the different governments, advisory groups, and teaching, and all of those things that make my knowledge what it is, this has been a common theme for myself since I learned about it as a solution. And, you know, even though there's new ideologies, new perspectives, new strategies, you know, this government's doing this community's doing that, with this therapeutic community model, and there's books on the therapeutic community model. They started off in San Patriano in Italy years and years ago as a way to deal with underlying criminality. So the issues that were contributing to the criminological factors that individuals were committing crime and causing disorder and those types of things in the community. So if we're looking at a First Nations community, for example, what would we need to do? Well, first of all, we need to take into account what the needs are of an individual. So taking the philosophy of the harm reduction approach, where we meet people where they're at. I think that it's very hard for any of us who work in the field or govern or policymakers to agree that if we try to fit people into a box, that's what we've been doing the status quo for years, and it doesn't work. So when we start off this therapeutic community, first of all, safety. It needs to be client-centered. It needs to be peer-supported, and it needs to have all of the needs. So in Alberta, what they've done is they've taken ATCO trailers. And basically, they are going to find sites, and they're going to put these different ATCO trailers, much like a camp. So what they did here when the oil and gas kind of plummeted is they went to ATCO and they said, look, how long would it take and how much capital would we need to create a community, which is essentially what camps are, right? They take them out into rural and they create gyms and access to food and offices and quarters, residential quarters. And so why could we not have a recovery community, a therapeutic recovery community with different buildings? So we have an access point where we do assessment, and that access point can be, instead of a police officer taking somebody to jail or an ACT team taking someone to the psych ward, why could we not have availability to have anyone who has that willingness at one point to go in, be assessed? And at that point, do they need to go back to the hospital and have that psychiatric care? Do they need to go to be hospitalized to have medical issues treated? And at that point, we bring the individuals in, and then it's like a streamlined approach, and parents can use this. We as service providers could use these therapeutic communities as a place to start. So for your child has an overdose on fentanyl, you have no idea what to do or where to start. I mean, the education around addictions is a whole other issue. So there would be common knowledge and developing a culture around this therapeutic community whether it's in a First Nations again, or in the larger community, where we take individuals and mom can drive right to there and drop them off and give the information and give the criteria, the background, the intel, the collateral, whatever is needed. You know, it would be nice if those assessment points had access to, you know, if this person's on welfare. So you know, having access to say, how many times has this person been to the hospital? How many times, like, what medications are these people on? We need to be smart about every intersection that we're intervening on to make sure that we don't again create those same barriers for individuals who are trying to access services. And at that point, if you can visualize it in your mind, and it doesn't matter if it's ATCO trailers, it doesn't matter if it's an old institutional building, whatever it is, but we need to be able to separate and specialize those individuals. So if we have individuals with very significant mental health issues that maybe would be unsafe with a group of males or a group of females, or their anxiety, they're not ready to go into that place where they could be around, say, 20 people. So we need to treat them in a different stream. So, you know, in this house, let's say, you know, think of it like a campus setting. And then this house is where the individuals, and they can graduate to these different places. There's a program building, there would be a building for recreation, there would be a building for daycare, there would be the second stage type facilities for families as well. So I'm not sure how many of you particularly work in the field that run into barriers with clients with children. If you're a mother of two and you've developed an addiction to opioids through prescription drugs, let's say, what do? You're terrified to call anyone because you're scared of losing your children. And so we need to create this culture of safety where it's okay. Or you're somebody who has already lost your children, or you're somebody who is incarcerated, because that's the only place for you. There is no other place for you. You don't have the resources. Your family does not have the resources to hook you into private care, let's say. You know, so I think what happens when we look at this therapeutic community model is we start to mitigate things like overrepresentation of Aboriginals or Indigenous individuals or mental health individuals in the criminal justice system. We can mitigate, potentially mitigate children going into the foster system. We all know statistically that, again, First Nations individuals are overrepresented in the foster care system, and that's across the nation. You know, there's opportunities within this community to start to build safety, so that, let's say you have a client who you've placed in one of these therapeutic communities, that you can actually come in and access them. We bring elders in, we bring culture, we put up a teepee. Maybe we have elders who bring individuals from the Coast Salish territories, if there's a therapeutic community in BC, out to ceremony in Longhouse. There is so much ceremony and culture that gets doesn't get reinserted back into a First Nations member who maybe has been on the street, has been addicted, has lost their children, burnt bridges with families. And that spiritual component is critical to our people. And I believe that it's not just critical to First Nations people. I believe it's critical to all humans. And you know, I've been operating under the premise that addiction is a spiritual sickness for a long time. You know, and so we need spiritual solutions. And what are they? Those are not religious solutions. Those are spiritual solutions. So it can be something simple as, you know, getting individuals engaged in talking about the smudge ceremony, for example. What does that mean? What does a cleansing ceremony mean? What does that look like in your life? What does that look like in your background? What does that look like? You know, when we look at colonization and the impacts of colonization on the different generations, I don't know how many First Nations people I work with. I'd say the majority of the First Nations people that I've worked with are so disconnected from their culture. Some of them may not even have membership. Some of them don't know where they're from. They were born in or raised in the foster system. And so there's all these different pieces that instead of doing these piecemeal kind of approaches, that I think a community, an actual therapeutic recovery community that enables people to come in and then we get them wherever they need to go. So is assessment going to be the biggest part of the therapeutic community? Possibly. Can we make satellite assessment centers? Can we train people to be part of this? Absolutely, I think we can. And, you know, I sat on a panel, and I apologize if there's anybody from the former BC government here, if I don't mean to offend anyone, but I did I sat on a blue ribbon panel on crime reduction, and we created a report that went to government, and it got buried and it got shelved. And one of the suggestions and recommendations within that report, headed up by Dr. Daryl Plekas, was that we utilize the provincial jail system the way that it is. So where's the largest detox that you guys can think of? It's provincial jails. And I heard Derek, that young man, say it out loud. I know this to be true from working in the system. I know this to be true from working with thousands of individuals. Provincial jails are our largest detox. And I would argue that also police cells are our largest detox. And so do we need to be incarcerating all those individuals with mental health issues and substance abuse issues? And, you know, to support that, when I was doing my undergrad, I worked in the Nanaimo Correctional Center in a therapeutic community there called Guthrie House. And I was the inmate assistance worker for the entire population of that jail. So it was about 343 individuals. And I would say that close to 90% of my caseload had either committed their offense while they were intoxicated, or they did it they committed an offense against the criminal code to get substances. And then I would say the other 10% mental health. But of course, then, you know, not to split hairs, but let's just say the majority of individuals housed in our provincial jail system potentially maybe don't need to be there, or we change the strategy. And that's very difficult to do because provincial and federal jail systems are very much status quo, and they've been run by the government for a long time. But, you know, would it harm us to do a pilot project and take one provincial jail and turn it into this therapeutic community? I don't know. It's unfortunate that the Liberal government at the time, you know, and BC Corrections didn't want to entertain that idea. You know, there were some brilliant minds that I sat on that panel with, and I have no understanding why these recommendations were shot down. Bev Bussin, who's now a senator, was one of the first female RCMP officers. There was Daryl Plekas, who's world-renowned criminologist, Dr. Yvonne Danderand, Gary Bass. There was some very, very, very intelligent individuals in law enforcement and surrounding law enforcement that were on that panel. And yeah, it's just very unfortunate. But I will not, you know, resign from the idea that this is where we need to go and this is where we need to be. Do you put 5 of them in BC? You know, I know in Alberta, we're already moving in that direction because the UCP has recognized that we need this. And the other piece, I know I'm running out of time here. The other piece that I think is also very important, whether you're talking about First Nations communities or not, is prevention and intervention. And unfortunately, funding for prevention and intervention is almost next to impossible to get because there's no statistics. How do we know if we run a program and we prevented somebody from engaging in criminal activity or in drug use? It's very, very hard. If we do longitudinal studies, perhaps, but again, the dollars for longitudinal studies on something around prevention or an intervention strategy, early intervention strategy, is difficult to measure. I think that we have to be cognizant that we are just going to spin our tires if we don't look at a solution that involves prevention and intervention. You know, being a survivor, if you will, or somebody who was significantly abused as a child, sexually, emotionally, all of those types of things. then look at what interventions would have made a difference. So there's again, in Alberta, they've got some political will and some traction around these child advocacy centers. We do have some in BC as well. And do we need to look at centers of excellence where we educate people, where again, we bring services together? Not sure how many of you are familiar with the Sheldon Kennedy Child Advocacy Center, or the former Sheldon Kennedy Child Advocacy Center, which is now the Calgary, Alberta Center for Child Advocacy, and then there's the Central Alberta Center for Child Advocacy. And what these centers do is they bring all the agencies together that work with child victims or people that have been children who have been exposed. And what they do is they try to mitigate further trauma to the child. So they bring the Crown prosecutors in, they have interview rooms, and the police and the social workers and the Crown and nonprofits. All the people are in the same building, all working together and talking about the cases to minimize the harm to the children. And then there's also psychiatrists and psychologists on these sites. So basically it comes down to environment, right? What environment of collaboration are we creating? It's easy to say, oh, we're going to collaborate. Okay, what does that look like? If I'm a police officer, a child abuse detective, and I want to talk to the social worker of this family, I should be able to walk across the hall and do that. Not phone, make a time for a meeting, have the family come in, children going to police stations to be, you know, interviewed. I mean, all of those things, they have to go. They're not working. You know, they're not trauma informed. I know trauma informed is a big buzzword, so to speak. What does that actually mean to be trauma informed? You know, do you have to be a survivor to be trauma informed? No, you don't. You absolutely don't. But what does that actually mean? How are we training individuals, you know, even in the addictions and mental health field? How are we training individuals to understand First Nations ways of knowing? How are we training individuals to understand what intergenerational trauma is? If you are not a First Nations person and you have children, close your eyes for a minute and imagine the RCMP coming in and taking your children away and sending them to school and changing their belief system, trying to assimilate them to a certain way. There are academics who believe that it's nothing short of genocide, these types of things. So, you know, people say, well, kind of get over it. That was a long time ago. Not if you're a First Nations person, especially if you're living on a nation or a reserve or a tribe or some designated area that you were told to live by the government. So I realize that I'm out of time. You know, this is a topic that I could talk about forever. You know, I really look forward to where we're going with all of this work, with all of these things that we've attended in the last 4 weeks. Janelle, and your team and your colleagues, I can't say enough about your advocacy work, your passion, your understanding, your you just get it. And those are the kinds of people that we need. We need leadership pushing things forward. Do I believe some of these things will change in my lifetime? No, I don't. But I want my grandchild to live in a different world than I live in. I want her to be able to know that those individuals who are struggling in our society can get the help that they need when they need it. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Your presentation today was very appropriate to our topic, reinforcing communities. And we really appreciate the thread of First Nations communities throughout your presentation today. And I'd ask the audience in the chat to share what Indigenous community services are you aware of in your community. I think also, Jerry, you bring some really important messages to us. First, that all communities are different. And at the same time, a therapeutic community model can be very helpful in First Nations and non-First Nations communities, that all communities need safe, capable, specialized, comprehensive support for people with brain injury, mental health, and addiction, that we need to start with needs and certainly include peer support. So thank you very much, Jerry. It was really a pleasure to hear your presentation today that touched on so many important ways of supporting communities. I'd now like to invite Mariah Brees to give us a summary of what stands out for her from today's presentations. Mariah.
Thank you, Shauna. I want to thank all the speakers today. I made pages and pages of notes that I was going to take some touch points from and share, but I think for me, the biggest thing I got from it all was silos don't work. We need to tear down silos. We need to stop treating diagnosis, and we need to start supporting people. You're a person first. What do you need? How can we help? And we need to call on our governments and our dollars, the people who hand out the dollars. How can we do that to support people? Something that Jerry touched on but was missing, though, is how do we support those families? How do we support mom, dad, brother? How do we support those people to create the safe space for their loved one to get the help they need, to get the rehab they need, the supports they need? And that's huge. And so that's what stood out for me today. I'm curious to know what stood out for all of you, and I look forward to seeing what happens after think tanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariah, and thank you for asking the question that we'd like to pose to our audience. What stands out for you from all of today's presentations? We've asked for your comments on each individual speaker, but really if you kind of roll it all together in terms of our theme of reinforcing communities, what stands out for you from today's presentations? Well, Janelle, it's been an amazing series of virtual events, of speakers and conversations. I'd like to invite you here and now to wrap up the virtual part of our think tank. Janelle.
Thank you, Shauna. And yes, what an amazing journey we have been on for these last 4 weeks. We began on October 20th with the lived experience of survivors and families. We've heard from service providers and frontline workers about different models, such as the Navigator model. We learned about the funding for brain injury services and just how under-resourced they are. We heard concerns about governance structures within the health authorities. We've learned about important research that is currently underway and new research on self-identity after brain injury. And today we came together to look at ways we can reinforce our communities province-wide. I do want to thank Dr. Higginbottam and Patty. You did me proud, for sure. We go back a long way, all of us, and been doing this march together. And you said exactly what has been on my mind for so long. So thank you for doing that. And Dr. Plant, that was an amazing presentation. I first heard Dr. Plant speak at Royal Jubilee Hospital, and I tracked her down after that presentation because I knew she was on to something that was extremely important. And I do want to tell a little funny story about your presentation because I was sitting over to the side with a mask on and earbuds on, and because, well, my daughters and I are wearing our memorial pins today in memory of their dad. When we left the house, it was a last-minute decision to put those pins on. But when I was listening, I could hear the snoring, and my first husband could drive people out of our house with the amount of snoring he did. And I do believe in communication from the other side. And I was thinking, this is not the time to be connecting with me. So I was very happy to hear it was your dog that was snoring. Thank you. The other important point about fentanyl for our family is that my brother, who died the year before my husband, died from fentanyl. It wasn't an overdose. It was a prescribed drug, and it was prescribed by one doctor, and another doctor prescribed Talwin, and it interacted. And so Brian was 39 years old, and he lived in a coma for 2 weeks before he died. He was comfortable, but I assure you that was a very slow, painful death for our family to watch. So I have a big concern about fentanyl being on the streets. Before I get too far into the rest of my comments, I want to share a phone message that I received after the first virtual event. Not like other events when I speak, or sometimes when people read a book of mine, I hear from people who are struggling and they need help. And not like, unlike other calls, when I called this person back, his story took my breath away. So I'm going to ask the team if they would play the audio clip now. And they're going to put up a slide as well.
I'm not sure whether you know that or not, and
M2W2, trying to find work. I'm not sure whether you know that or not. And through the obstacles of, in my circumstances, which are getting better and better every day, thanks to groups like yours and M2W2. You can go to the m2w2.ca. It's an acronym for man to man, woman to woman, restorative justice, and ministries for incarcerated people who were. I made a mistake. I am not a mistake. I'm what they call a one-timer, an only-timer. Unfortunately, I have a life sentence, and I'm doing the best I can to give back to the associations that are helping.
Although you may not have heard his story, you'll find all that I have to say on the internet. In 1994, Joe was hit by a transit bus in Alberta, and I believe he said he was driving a minivan. He suffered a traumatic brain injury, yet he received no services or supports in the early years following his injury, which had a dramatic impact on his mental health. Over time, Joe was prescribed a plethora of prescription drugs, which one psychiatrist described as a cocktail of pills. As his mental health declined, so too did the quality of his family life. There was an attempt to have Joe placed in a licensed care facility, but his family, who didn't have support, also didn't want him to be separated from them and declined the offer. His problems escalated over time, and Joe left the family home and began drinking heavily. The alcohol mixed with the prescriptions was a dangerous combination. And as you saw in 2002, Joe shot and killed his wife at a gas station while she gassed up the family vehicle. I'm not going to plead his case here. Joe was under both the influence of drugs and alcohol. And once he sobered up somewhat, he turned himself into police. He was charged with second-degree murder, convicted, and sentenced. He was imprisoned for 14 years before being released on life parole. Joe's life is not one of freedom, and he accepts that. He is not allowed contact with his 5 children, and he knows this was the worst crime of all. What I want to say about the case, though, is that although he paid the price imposed by the court, and he will continue to pay in so many ways until the end of his life, there is much to be learned from his case. Although the newspaper headlines proudly stated, once again, stalking laws don't work. The truth is, he didn't have the capacity with an untreated brain injury, cocktail of prescription drugs, and significant levels of alcohol in his system to function in the way he needed to. I do believe in law and order, and I understand firsthand the impact of murder on a family. I've been there too. I've been the next of kin who's been notified of a murder. But I also believe, without a doubt, that in his case, his wife's life would not have been taken had he and the entire family received the services and supports they needed from the time of his injury. As we learned today from Derek, whose story, there is a clear link between undiagnosed and untreated brain injury and incarceration. In fact, more than 80% of prisoners have a brain injury, and more than 60% of that group suffered their first brain injury as a child, and often at the hand of abuse. In society, we want to pick and choose what's tolerated. And I can tell you, as a result of my own trauma, I became the socially accepted and often admired workaholic, an addiction that is often dismissed as being problematic. Nonetheless, it is an addiction. For society, it is the other addictions we hold in judgment and work tirelessly to shed light upon. However, in holding judgment around any addiction, we also keep those who suffer in the shadows: alcoholics, drug addicts, sex addicts, gamblers. It's easy to judge and dismiss their problems as laziness or a lack of willpower or because they are simply immoral. The truth is that the shadow is the pain, emotional and spiritual, and for some, physical. Like me, a person who was living in a vortex of a broken heart, they too are desperately looking for a way to escape the pain. Individuals living on the street are assumed to reject what it means to be a good citizen. We assume they reject paying taxes. We assume they would reject family and friends. We assume they will reject employment, and we assume those who refuse supportive housing as being unreasonable, ungrateful, and radical. We wonder, and we do it in judgment, why do they choose to stay in the shadows when so many hands are extended to help? Because the pain is greater than the will to change. The shame, the helplessness, and the hopelessness reign bigger than knowing life can be different if you do the work of healing. I worked with Derek professionally for over 5 years. Today we are friends. He is friends with my family, and he often joins us for special occasions. So me, the cop's wife, and Derek, a person who served many years in prison, understand emotional and spiritual pain from opposite ends of the spectrum. But we know the pain and suffering are undeniably the same. Our mutual understanding is that a healthy mind will always make the right choices to support a healthy life, and an unhealthy mind will breed isolation, and isolation will breed mental health and addiction struggles. Whether we call it mental health issues, mental health challenges, or mental illness, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we understand that mental health impacts the lives of those living with a brain injury, and when untreated, it can and it will have dire consequences. Prescription drugs, street drugs, alcohol, porn, or the overuse of the now legalized marijuana are common struggles for many of our clients. Yet when it becomes out of control and family seeks interventions, they are denied and told their loved one is too complex. We, as service providers, are often told the clients are too complex. It's brain injury. We don't deal with that. Or deal with the brain injury first and then come back and ask about treatment or support. Those are common responses that people are getting when they are attempting to access service. What we have learned in the think tanks is that services vary from town to town and city to city. But the theme that rang throughout is that there is not enough funded service in BC. Services in BC for survivors, they actually have waited up to 3 years before being contacted about service. That's contacted. That doesn't mean they received the service. If they are fortunate to be off-ramped into brain injury services in the health authority, it is often for short-term service only, meaning 6 months or less. Those services are for the survivor only, and they generally do not include the family's needs, and only a select few will receive counseling. The counseling must be for the survivor and the focus on brain injury only. In my remarks last week, I shared why that approach does not work, nor is it realistic. When the person cannot meet the criteria to access services in the health authority, if there is a local brain injury association, they do their best to provide the supports, and when there is not, the survivor simply goes without. We are spending millions in costs associated with policing, emergency services, incarceration, and homelessness, which in most cases is linked back to brain injury. It is known that more than half of the homeless have a brain injury, and more than 70% of them became homeless after their first brain injury. We can and must do better by investing funds into care and supports. We have learned that when a person sustains a brain injury, the entire family lives with it. Each person in the family will struggle in their own way. Can you really know what it's like to be a spouse or a parent who works 2 jobs, is constantly fighting the fight for their loved one, and is told they should do more and more and more? They are not offered respite. They are not paid to provide care, regardless if they are the sole breadwinner and must leave their job to care for their loved one. Is it any wonder that spouses, parents, caregivers, and children experience their own mental health issues? They too are at risk should their own mental health go unchecked, as they look for ways to escape the pain. So what do we need to do to strengthen our communities? We need to build bridges of hope. Know that bridges are built because they are a safe and efficient way to move people from one place to another. There has never been a town or a city decide to not build a bridge for fear that no one would use it or that it wouldn't work in the way it was intended. They invest money into consultants and experts and build the bridge with confidence, knowing that the bridge will make life better for the people who live there. If we use a bridge as a metaphor, yes, it is going to cost money to build a bridge for clients to access supports when struggling with mental health, addiction, and brain injury. But the cost isn't a reason to not find a way to move them to a safer, better life. As I said, we were already spending the money. When a bridge is built, there will be people waiting at the ribbon cutting to be the first to cross, and there'll be others who, like me, wait for a few high winds to pass through the region to ensure the structure remains in place. And there will be those who refuse to cross it altogether because they don't want it and they don't think it is needed. It doesn't matter that people don't cross the bridge when we think they should. It matters that it's there for people who are ready to cross it and to have it remain in place for others when the time is right for them. If we build it, they will come and we will see success. In British Columbia, we are spending millions on safe injection sites and naloxone kits. I support this. I am all for saving lives. But for 30 years, I have also said, if we save a life, we must sustain quality of life too. We need to provide appropriate care and homes for these folks who have survived an overdose. With an estimated 60% of individuals who live with a moderate to severe brain injury experiencing mental health issues, and an estimated 1/3 of brain injury survivors engaging in dangerous levels of substance use, and knowing that our prisons are filled with survivors and that 53% of the homeless have a brain injury, I think it's safe to say loud and clear, traumatic brain injury is the root cause and the missing link in all the conversations taking place in an effort to address these social issues. We have a brain injury crisis, yet brain injury remains the orphan of our healthcare system. No one wants to be responsible for it, and everyone assumes someone else is taking care of it. My hope is that our think tanks clearly demonstrated this link between mental health, addictions, and brain injury. So today I ask you to support our work, stay engaged in our website, headstogetherthinktank.com. We will be sending each person the report with our next steps outlined. Please continue to post in our discussion groups on the site. And most of all, please send me emails and letters of support and help us to end the stigma, end the shame, and to end the struggle. In closing, I want to thank my board of directors, our committee planning members, and speakers for elevating a thought and a dream to this amazing event. I want to thank my family, my friends, and my colleagues for their support of this work. I especially want to acknowledge my daughters, Mariah and Dale, for walking this journey with me. I know their father's proud of them, and I am too. They've become amazing leaders. To my husband, Lyle, our behind-the-scene guy who does everything. He's taken all 4 of these Tuesdays off so he can mail letters, do the grocery shopping, and shuttle our grandchildren to and from where they needed to go so my daughters and I could do this work. Thank you from all 3 of us. To Shauna, Nikki, Aiden, Steph, and the team here at Sunset Labs, we could not have done this without you. You have been dedicated and worked tirelessly alongside of us, and that has not gone unnoticed. You have all gone above and beyond the contracts that you signed with me. Most importantly, to all the survivors, to the Derricks, to the Tonys, to the Barb Butlers, and to their families who walk this journey every day, you are the heroes. You are the superstars, and we do what we do for all of you. Thank you for your support, and thank you for staying with us. Again, we do have one more survey, and if you complete the survey, you'll be entered into a draw, and because of our timing, we will close that survey link on Monday. So that will be sent out to you today, and we ask that you complete it. It takes about 5 minutes. Thank you for joining us for all of these sessions, and they will be on our website so you can revisit them as many times as you like. And when you get our report, please take that to your MLA, take it to your member of parliament, take it to your mayors, take it to everybody you know, and declare that this is an important conversation they need to have at home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janelle. And so we come to the end of the virtual Heads Together think tank. Janelle, I want to thank you for your energy, your passion, and your vision, for always bringing the reality and the consequences of poorly integrated services for people with brain injury, mental health, and addiction to the fore. It's about the people and our important need to serve those people. Thank you for opening the conversation and for giving us the bridge metaphor that we can use going forward. We have one last question, and that's the word cloud question. We finished each of these sessions asking you a question to answer in maybe 1, 2, 3 words, because that's the best way to create a word cloud. So think about this session and any other session that you've attended with us over the think tank. And this question, what is one way you would like us to keep moving forward to integrate services for people with brain injury, mental health, and addiction? What is one thing you'd really like us to do as we move forward? And enter that in the chat box. Thank you very much for being here today. I'll remind you to go to the website, that there are discussion groups there specific to each of our virtual sessions, that we will have the recordings of the virtual sessions posted there in due course, hopefully fairly soon. In the chat, there will be a link to the survey. But the most important thing as we say goodbye is to run the credits. Certainly, thank you to our speakers today, to Drs. Higginbottam and Plant for launching the session today, and for our for discussion of community services, for Patty and for Scott, to Derek to talking about his reality, and for Jerry to winding us up, offering a bookend to our programs. Love to thank our team members and call them up. So come on up, team members. I don't know, do you guys know you're coming up? Certainly we have Janelle and her daughters, Mariah and Dale and Derek. Thanks to our team members who've been working behind the scenes. We have Nikki and Stephanie and Aiden who've been here to support. And the people you can't see who are clapping are behind the scenes, and that's our production team. And wow, you guys have done an amazing job. Jason, Mike, Andrew, Krev, and Zenon. It's been really an honor to work with everybody on all of the teams. Most of all, thanks to you, everyone who's listening today live and who will watch the video recordings on the website. It's really important that you remain part of the conversations we have about integrating services for people with brain injury, mental health, and addiction. Thank you very much, and blessings to all of you. Bye-bye.